There you go.
Okay, nice.
Okay, so Garnet, we're going to ignore you for a little bit and just chat with Jason to make sure we're all set up to go. Okay. So Jason, we're going to start off with Kevin kind of doing the story about Taleo as he does each week, and then he'll hand it over to me. And then as you and I chatted, I'm going to kind of start with who Jason Gregor is as a human, because I think every so often you are a human.
Sure.
And then we'll move into your giving to the community, and then we'll start with your focus on the business of sports, and then we'll move into the future of sports. Sound good?
Perfect. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll turn my light on. Maybe it'll be brighter in here.
Short, a couple of lines, make the word compact, making it easy. So we're going to switch to category 3. Is the other part is how do I highlight my skills and all of my abilities?
It's probably a bit better.
Yeah, that looks good.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to share, Kevin? Because you usually run this, and I don't want to be the boss telling you what to do.
No, I'm looking forward to it either way. Jason, thanks for coming on today. So like I said, as Laurel mentioned, we'll just do a quick little bit at the start talking about why we're doing this. And then I know there's going to be lots of questions, I have a feeling. So we can get right into it as quick as possible, I feel. We're usually pretty timely. We like to keep everybody right around that 30 minutes just because it is we're on people's lunch hours, and also too because we want to be cognizant of people's times. So just so you know, but if you're available to stick around for a couple minutes, I know your show starts at 2, but
no, I got some time. No rush.
Excellent. Okay, that's great. And then usually we'll get going in a couple of minutes. We'll just give some time for everybody to kind of jump on. We still have a few minutes before our scheduled start times.
I should turn this around. There.
We're starting to get a bunch more people coming on. Dave, how are you today? Nice to see you. Dwight, thanks for joining us. I know you were excited about this one. I'm sure Dwight has a list of questions he's going to be asked. See who else jumps on the camera and see who's sporting colors. I see we have Laurel's got her Oilers jersey. Garnett's, of course, with the Rough Riders. There you go. I was going to wear my Habs jersey, but I think everybody might have thrown me off the call. So there you go.
Yeah, I don't think it would be well received.
Agreed. I think so. So probably best. Perfect. We're getting lots of people coming on. We're just coming on a little bit early, which is nice. So, okay. All right, we're great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. It is 12:15, so I wanted to get started because I know that we have a wonderful speaker, and I wanted to make sure that they had enough time to we could pick their brain and talk about it. So thank you for joining Taleo Connects. This is our webinar series that we've been doing now since the start of COVID. It's really great to get together and connect with all of you, touch base, see people's faces. I know that's a big challenge these days for a lot of people. So once again, thank you for joining us. Your time is very valuable. We have a fantastic speaker that's come to join us. He's a little bit north of our typical Calgary contingent today up in Edmonton. But again, everybody's working remotely these days, so it's fantastic. So I wanted to introduce, of course, first of all, everybody knows our Taleo partner, Laurel Sim, who will be facilitating this call, as she knows Jason quite well. And then, of course, TSN's Jason Gregor is joining us today from up in Edmonton, I think up in St. Albert way. So I will pass everything off to you folks. So Laurel, you can kind of jump in and take over from there. So thanks again for joining us.
Great, thanks, Kevin. So with Taleo, we typically focus on projects and how we deliver the betterment for businesses. And I think that all too often we forget that projects exist everywhere in the world and in all types of business. And it was at that point that I realized that it would be a really great opportunity to have a conversation with somebody who really is close to a major disruption, which is the sporting community. So at this time, I'm going to be interviewing Jason Gregor for the course of the next half an hour. And if you guys have questions, we really look forward to you sharing it on the chat, and we'll bring those questions forward. So Jason, before we get started, I just wanted to share with people a little bit about your background, how you came to be who you are today, and move things forward, if that's okay.
Sure.
So Jason Gregor and I have actually known each other for over 20 years. That's because we're only 25, so we were very young when we first met. And we actually went through a very turbulent time in our lives at the very similar time, which was the loss of our fathers. And so I think that both of us have figured out how to become more resilient and create memories of our fathers in everything that we do. And so I think that's one thing that has always allowed Jason and I to stay very closely connected. Jason grew up on a farm, and so I will be asking him a few questions about how he stays connected with that life on the farm. He's also the father of a young boy that is keeping him running day and night. I'm sure of that. And so let's just step right into it. So Jason, why don't you just tell us a little bit how you've been able to stay connected in the busy world of sports while still looking at the farm?
Well, like a lot of people, I'm working from home now. We're not in studio every day, so you're there. That's working from home's actually allowed me a lot of extra times to, I'm not driving to and from work, or you're not driving to practices or anything. So I find I have more downtime during the day, so I can hang out with my son who's 6, and he's obviously not in school right now. So my wife needs a break from home parenting. So it's good for me. Like, we were actually just on a bike ride this morning for about an hour and a half, just wheeling around St. Albert. So it's a lot of fun. This spring, my mom still lives at our farm out by New Sarepta. And I always kind of joke, I'm just a hired hand. I do all the calving and stuff. And we still have a hobby farm, about 20, 25 cows. And this April was unseasonably cold, so I actually slept at the farm for the first time in years, because it was minus 25 overnight and had to worry about calves freezing and stuff. So that was a little odd for April, but it's kind of the time that we're in right now. It's expect the unexpected, shall they say. And you know what? I'm kind of lucky. I'm different, really. There's not a lot of people who do what I do. I actually own my own radio show. I don't work for TSN technically. I'm like a subcontractor. I started my own company. I was on the radio, and then I started my own company in 2005. So it's 15 years now that I've owned my show, and just started out late at night from 11 p.m. till 1 a.m. and slowly just moved up the ranks. And I've had the drive show since 2008, prime time from 2 to 6 p.m. So I run business. I didn't have a business background. I kind of learned as I went, and, it's gone exceptionally well. So that's opened up a lot of doors. Just, it's gone better than I expected. So it's allowed me to kind of expand my business opportunities as well. And that gives me some free time to do what I want to do at the farm. So I like having the farm. It really counterbalances kind of the hectic life of living in the city.
Great. Well, if you can see my background, I'm actually out at my family farm as well, just chilling like a villain. So I get the noise and the sounds. So Jason, a big part of what you have done and incorporated into how you show up for the community in Alberta, I'm not going to just say Edmonton, is how you give back. And I'd like us just to pause really quickly on that to remind people of times like this, how important it really is, and what you've done and made a priority in your life before we move into the business of sports.
Yeah, philanthropy is something that my father grew up, fairly poor, and he didn't talk about it a whole bunch. But when we were older, he mentioned it to us a few times, and we were, I would say, a middle class family growing up in the 80s, and obviously, my father worked in the oil field, and that kind of went to pot in the 80s, and then he had hip surgery, so he ended up just kind of running the farm. And my dad didn't really know a cow from a horse when he met my mom, so he just kind of learned, and he was very diverse. And I just, when he always reminded us to help people when you could. My dad was one who would, if we were walking down the street and saw somebody who, he'd give him, he never said no if he had change in his pocket. Even if we didn't have a lot, he'd always give something. And I think I just kind of, learned through osmosis really of that. And when I started my radio show, it wasn't, it wasn't like I had a big plan. I was going to do a lot of philanthropy. I almost kind of stumbled into it. I thought one year I started a thing called Month of Giving, where in the month of December, I felt, hey, you know what, maybe we could raise, do different prizes on my show every day, and we could raise some money for Santa's Anonymous and Christmas Bureau. My goal that December was to raise 25 grand. Well, it went way better, and we ended up raising 55,000 the first year, and this past year in 16 days we raised 119 grand. So we're up over $800,000 in the 7-8 years that I've done it, and I've just kind of expanded that into a lot of other charity things. I do a lot for Alzheimer's and MS, and boys and girls clubs to help kids. We do a lot of lunch programs, and then 6 years ago I started my own foundation called Gregor's Grads, where we provide new suits, shirts, ties, and shoes for high school grads who otherwise can't afford it and then wouldn't go to their graduation. And I got the idea from Cinderella's Closet. They did it for girls, and I thought it was awesome, but there wasn't really anything for boys, and boys work just as hard as girls to graduate. And, they come, unfortunately, just like some girls, come from a tough background. And so it's really been amazing. You get to see these kids, they come in, we've teamed up with Mr. Dirk, and we bring the boys right into the store. So they get fitted just like anybody else and any other grad. It's their own new suit. They get to keep it. And it really gives a lot of pride. You should see the kids are pretty fired up when they come in. And even this year with obviously, not a lot of grads, we've still fitted some because they're doing virtual graduations. And, a lot of these kids, they might never go on to post-secondary. So a lot of them, we've gotten great emails from kids who use that suit to go to a job interview, and they really feel that they got the job because of their suit. And I always tell them, I said, the suit just gave you confidence. Your smarts is what got you the job. And it's amazing. It doesn't matter what age you are. You're 40 years old. That feeling of when you get a new suit, you're like, hey, what's happening? I feel pretty good. So you imagine an 18-year-old kid who maybe doesn't come from a lot, and they get to, when they stand in that mirror the first time, it's amazing.
Well, coming from a girl that knows the suit does matter because they won't pay attention to you until after the suit shows up, I get it. So thank you for doing that for the community and being a big ambassador for the betterment of not only Edmonton but other areas. So thank you for that.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
I guess the big crux of the question that I want to ask you, that it's going to be a big meaty subject line, is where do you see sports going? I think there's going to be, a big reset. I think there's going to be a lot of challenges going forward, but where do you see it going, and what opportunities do you think are coming from this pandemic?
That's a good question. I've kind of argued for many years. I felt the sports world was due for a reset. Now, obviously, I didn't think it would be during a pandemic, but I just felt like with the amount of money that just kept going up and up, and you've got hockey players making 13 million, and basketball players making 40 and 50, and baseball players the same thing. That at some point the gap was going to become too much, and people were like, you know what, I can't afford to go to games anymore. I don't really want to go to the games anymore and spend, if you go a family of 4, you're talking $1,200 really, when you think food and parking and beverage, and it's just too much. So this is going to be the reset for sports, and I'm curious to see how they feel, because a lot of owners bought the sports team knowing that, hey, I buy it for $250 million. I was going to sell it for $500 million down the road. And that, making money every year wasn't that important. It was more so knowing they had the team that eventually if they sold it, that's where they would make all, their return on investment would come there. And that's going to change now, because sports is going to really have to change things. Like you look at hockey, for instance, just in Edmonton, or Calgary's the same way. You look at a suite at an Oiler game is about $300 grand. Well, there's a limited amount of companies that can afford that. So now you come out of a pandemic, and companies are going to look and say, okay, are we paying our employees, or are we going to buy a suite for $300 grand? Well, we all know what the answer is going to be. So they're going to have to really change how they approach and think that, hey, because I felt at times pro sports, especially hockey in Canada, some of the teams felt like it was an honor for you to give them their money. Like, look at you get to come and watch us play. And, they didn't do a lot, I believe, of great customer service. I'm a season ticket holder, and you know what? Basically, they send you an email. Oh, here's your ticket renewal, and that's about it. There's not much else going on. And I'm not a suite holder by any stretch, but we have good seats in the lower bowl. And I think hockey, their cost of tickets, their cost of food and beverage, it's going to go down. And so with that is the overall cost. And I'm curious to see how they adapt. And I think in the States, you know, like TV revenue is big for the NFL. So they're the one league that could probably handle the dip, but they're still going to lose something because your suite holders and everything else, eventually people are going to, there's going to be a cap on what you can spend. So I'm curious to see, and not just like the playoffs are one thing because the playoffs coming up here in hockey and basketball, that's TV revenue. But what happens next season, right? And now we are 6 months, 8 months in, companies are going to know where they're at. They're going to have to reset themselves because what we were spending in March and April, and I see it all the time from clients on my show, right? Like they're like, I want to advertise, but I can't afford the same rate. And obviously you want to keep them, then you got to, cut back. So I'm curious because sports, you think about it, and just in the NHL, I think a lot of us Canadians, we can relate to that. The salary cap was $39 million in 2006. It's 85. Like no business has grown that fast, that quickly in a lot of other realms. So I think a wake-up call is coming, and I'm curious to see how they react to it.
I think the wake-up call is very real, and I'm curious about how the athletes are feeling, not only about what you talk from a financial perspective, but also just the changing in momentum and how they were working themselves through the pandemic. So maybe you could attach those two questions.
Yeah, well, I've kind of had a front row seat. My nephew plays for the Sharks, so he didn't have a gym at home, so he was actually coming to my house to train. So him and I would talk all the time about how things are going. And now his team's not in the playoffs, so he now kind of took some time off because you're not going to work out 8 months straight until next season goes. But now he's a younger player and he's just coming in, so he's just excited. But I think he sees the reality. Like there's talk of probably being 30% escrow, which is basically, if you're making $1 million, 300 grand of that's going into escrow, it's basically coming off your bottom line. So you're really making, 700,000, which is still great money. Don't get me wrong. And I think for the most part, if the average salary in the NHL was 2.3 million, and now it goes down to, let's just even say 1, you're still making $1 million on average to play hockey. Like there's not a lot of jobs you can have that much fun. And there's a lot of other perks that go with it and everything else. And yeah, it's challenging, but it's still a game. And I think the players, well, it'll be hard to get used to maybe a reduction in salary. But I think when you're in the top 1%, when you get a reduction and you're still in the 1%, you can survive. Right? Like you'll be able to adapt, and maybe some guys won't want to because they were making $8 million a year and now they're 35 and they're like, well, I really don't want to play for 4. Okay, but that's because they're financially set. But I think the young players coming up, you go from making nothing and now you're going to make 800 grand or 700 grand. It's still way more money than you thought you'd ever make. So I think it'll be easier for the young players to adjust. Some, just like any of us in business, if you're used to making so much and now all of a sudden you're going to do the exact same job, but you're going to make 30% less, it's going to be more of a mental challenge than I think physically for a lot of the players and teams and everybody involved in sports.
Yeah, we're certainly noticing, as I'm sure you can appreciate, a huge challenge in the corporate world of salaries going down 25 to 40%. 40%, that's so significant. And on top of it, the rate of people that don't have a job right now is incredible. And we are so focused on the oil and gas industry to help us through these times, and they're feeling the greatest pain. So for sure we're trying to get everybody to level set, and they're able to level set by the simple fact that there's no work out there. These guys, they have to level set by looking at maybe Wayne Gretzky or Michael Jordan and say, look at what they made when they were doing what you were doing. Because from the comparisons that you're making, that's really what they need to actually start to compare to. Would you agree? 100%.
Yeah, like pro athletes weren't always making the $1 million, and players still loved it, right? So it's like anything. There's a lot of us in certain occupations that have made more. Now, obviously, cost of living, the houses when Gretzky played, didn't cost what they cost today. So it's all relative in some senses, but it is going to be fascinating to me to watch just how the world in general, like you mentioned oil and gas, and I have a lot of family. I worked in oil and gas before I went back to school, and that it's a real challenge for Alberta right now, and how we can diversify but also try to maintain what we have. And I think it's going to be a challenge for a lot of people. And so you look at oil and gas, especially in Calgary and Edmonton, they were huge supporters of NHL hockey. Well, now if those people don't have jobs, they don't have the disposable income to go to sporting events, right? Or buy jerseys and all those things. So it's going to be a massive drop of revenue overall. And I just, having covered pro sports, and when you get on the like sports from the outside, it's just like, oh, it's the greatest thing ever. When you get on the inside, you realize at times that there's some really good people, and then there's some people that, organizations that claim they care, they give two bleeps about a lot of their fan base, if I'm being bluntly honest. And now when your fans are struggling, are teams going to come out and offer right away, hey, we really want you back, here's a 60% of what you were paying? I don't think so. They're going to try and see how many people will come in at a similar rate, or they'll say, guess what, no increase in tickets, which, oh, thanks, like, yippee. You know what I mean? So I'm fascinated by that, because I really believe that, like, just specifically the Flames and the Oilers, they've never had to deal with it for a long time. And I'm curious to see how they will be able to handle it if all of a sudden 60 to 70% of their season ticket holders say, I'm not renewing at that rate. Because that's what I've talked to a lot of season ticket holders. I talked to thousands of them on my show via text and stuff. And they're like, I'm not renewing, because a lot of them saw that they could buy tickets online for $30 on the day of the game. Why would they buy season tickets? They're like, I don't need a season ticket. I'll go to the games I want to go to, and I'll probably get it at a reduced rate. And the 5 games a year that are higher, I'll pay that, and I'll still be better off. So it's going to be, they're going to have to lower their rates. They just have to. But right now, I believe they still think they can come out of it okay, because sometimes pro sports, they get in their own bubble and they lose sense of reality where the 90% of other people are. And we can all be guilty of that. If you live in a good community, you don't necessarily realize what a lot of other people are going through. But with this pandemic, I think a lot of people are going to realize that their little bubble, like, there's certain companies that are still thriving, but a lot of them are taking, reductions, and that's going to lead to a limitation, whether it's sports, movies, restaurants. When your disposable income shrinks, the first thing you're going to do is take care of your family. You're going to pay your house. You're going to pay for your food and everything else. So where does sports come in now? And because it is, and it's a big emotional connection for a lot of people. Like, we like sports. It allows us to have fun and creates excitement and camaraderie with a lot of people. But if it limits my ability to support my family, well, then I'll watch the games. I just won't go to the games.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We've got a couple of questions that I'm going to kind of put out there. I would like us to, before I go to that, actually, I'll do this question first because it's still on financials, and then I'll move on to the CFL. The question from Amul says, where does NHL stand for the revenue split between TV and attendance? How does that compare to the NFL, NBA, MLB, that sort of thing?
Well, the NFL's TV deal is ridiculous, right? Like, they've done numbers where if they had no fans in the stands, they'd still, they'd be making a lot of money. I would say the NFL package, comparatively, like, you look at the NHL last year, in 2018 is the most recent number you had of revenue. The NFL's total revenue was around 11 billion, and the NHL was at 5. And the NHL is much more of a reliant on gate, because keep in mind, they've got 41 home games. An NFL team only has 8, right? So just on the sheer number, there's 1,200 and 60 games a season in the NHL, and you've got 16 games a week in the NFL times. So you're talking, what is that, like 300 games, give or so? So yeah, it's really not close. The NHL is well below the Major League Baseball, the NBA, and the NFL. And while TV revenue is huge, but even TV revenue is going to have to take a cutback, because again, there's only so many companies that have the money to afford to pay to be on television. So that revenue is still going to be high because the viewers are going to be there. But you're going to limit certain companies. Some companies they're like, hey, I want to advertise, but I can't advertise at 100% of what I used to. I might only be able to afford 70% or whatever. So they'll all take a hit. But the NHL is right. The last I looked, I thought the NHL TV revenue compared to the NFL was probably like 15%.
Great, thank you. Jason, when I look at all of the, I'm a huge sports enthusiast, and so I follow all of the different leagues. One of the leagues that I worry the most about coming out of this is the CFL. I think it's probably got the weakest financial support, but does that affect this here? It was what it was, so it'll remain where it is? What are your thoughts?
That's a good question, because right now my gut tells me the CFL probably won't play this year, because, with all the medical experts saying they think there's going to be a surge back up in September, the CFL TV deal isn't big enough for them to play games with no fans, right? So I think the CFL might wait, and by next June, let's hope we've got a vaccine, and once you have a vaccine, then a lot of people are willing to go out again. The CFL, like everybody, will be impacted, but their amount of dollars that they bring in are so much smaller that some companies might be able to afford to advertise with them more cost effective. Now that they have a smaller piece of the pie, but sometimes having ownership of one small piece of a pie, if I'm an advertiser, and let's say they had Edmonton, they had Kubota, right? So you're Kubota, and you could say, well, we could be one of the advertisers in the NHL, and everybody kind of gets mixed in, or we could be the advertiser in the CFL for the same price. So, I've talked to companies, and sometimes it's better to be the big fish in a small pond than be one of the smaller fish in a big pond from a marketing standpoint. So I think the CFL, they'll obviously have to take a rebate as well for their players, and that's unfortunate. But I still believe the CFL will be here. Now, I think there's going to be in the next few years, I think we'll see a reduction in some teams and leagues. So does that mean maybe one CFL team goes by the wayside? I wouldn't be shocked by that, to be honest. Now Toronto's owned by a bigger conglomerate now, so maybe that'll save them, but they don't draw anybody. And I don't know if this is going to help their cause. If anything, it probably hurts them. But in the West, Calgary, Saskatchewan, Edmonton, Winnipeg, they've got some diehard fan bases who have always been CFL fans first. But their challenge will be, how do they market to get the young fans? Because their fan base has been significantly older than other leagues, and that's their challenge. I would say the bigger challenge for the CFL in the next 10 years is, can they get young fans watching their game again? Otherwise, they're just going to age out their fan base.
Speaking of aging out the Riders fan base, there's a silver-haired man that's wearing his, Riders logo in the background over there. Garnet. Oh my gosh. Anyways, so Jason, I'm going to move us over to hockey for a little bit. This is obviously an area that's near and dear to your heart. Although Taleo's company is in Calgary, I'm a through and through Oilers fan, as you can tell by my shirt. So I'd really like us to talk a little bit about what you see are the playoffs actually going to go. What do you think of that format, Matt? And let's talk about that for a moment.
Well, the NHL announced today that their training camps will start July 10th, which has been expected. And unless there's a massive surge in July or August, their plan is that they'll have 3 weeks of training camp, and then they'll get playing early August, similar timeline to the NBA. And so the advantage the NHL has is they're going to start with 24 teams. They'll be down to 16 basically in maximum in 10 days, right? Because those are best of 5 series. So now you're down to 16. In another 2 weeks, you'll be down to 8. So they shrink the amount of people involved pretty quickly. So that obviously reduces the risk, because now you have fewer people around interacting with other people. But let's say, I'm not worried about the NHL restarting. I'm worried about them continuing if the medical number and projections are accurate, that September or October has a big surge. What happens if you're now into the conference final, there's 4 teams, and there's a big hit in the hub city you're in, right? Let's say it's Vegas, and all of a sudden there's a massive hit. Now, how well are they maintaining in their bubble? What the advantage they have is they're tested. They're going to be testing all the time. I've had a few medical doctors on my show to say, if the NHL abides by the amount of testing they want to do, obviously it's going to cost them millions of dollars, but the chances of them, having a spread is pretty low, because they're testing so frequently that if one person gets it, you can get rid of that person pretty quick. So I believe right now, I would say, based on what the medical projections are, I'd say there's a 95% chance they start. Now, whether or not they finish, that's a little bit up in the air.
How do you see the Oilers doing with this 24-team format? And are you concerned about the performance of the players coming back after being off for so long?
Well, if you look at it, it's really going to be like an off season for the players, because, the Oilers, when they lost last year in April, they're done, and they didn't come back until, it's 6 months between regular season games. So let's say they come back August 1st. That's going to be 4.5 months. So it's actually a shorter off season. The difference is it's playoffs rather than into regular season games. I think the advantage the Oilers have is their power play is just deadly. And it's not, if they have a 4.5 months break, McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins, who are the core guys in their power play, their skill hasn't diminished, right? They're not suddenly, they haven't forgotten how to play. They've got chemistry and creativity as skill level. So the advantage the Oilers have coming out is their power play is just so good. And so they'll get chances and they'll likely score. And I think that, the game probably suits the Oilers better. They're not a defensive juggernaut. They have improved defensively, but the games are going to, like they are early in the regular season, they're a little sloppier. They're a little bit more freewheeling. Well, that plays into the Oilers' hands. If you give McDavid more space or you give Draisaitl more space, they're going to kill you. And the Oilers have the two best players in the league offensively right now on one team, and they're on separate lines. So, and they're playing Chicago. Like, Chicago's not very good, right? Like, they're, what are they, 23rd, 22nd team? Like, I kind of laugh at people. Wow, Chicago could get them. I'm like, what are you talking about? This team would never be in the playoffs if we're in a regular year. But now suddenly, I know that they won a cup, well, 3 of them with a lot of their guys, but that's 5 years ago. They haven't won a playoff game in 5 years. So the only advantage I see Chicago having is probably in goal with Corey Crawford. That's about it. But I think Edmonton's special teams are way better. Their top end guys are way better. Their blue line, actually, I know they got Duncan Keith, but Duncan Keith's 36. And after that, it's a big drop off in Chicago. So I see Edmonton, they win that series in 4. I wouldn't be surprised if they won it in 3. The only reason they lose is if they just soil the sheets. And that you can't predict. But on a skill level, they're a more skilled team, which is rare to say. I think Oilers fans, they don't want to admit that they actually have a good team because they've seen so many crap teams, so they don't want to get their hype up. But I've covered the Oilers for 15, 20 years. Like, I've seen garbage teams. This team isn't garbage. This team's actually pretty good.
Well, I like that you're saying actually pretty good. That's very friendly of you. So just looking at the Oilers and the Flames, because I know I have a lot of Flame fans on the show with you right now. What are you liking about this renewed rivalry, and why are people trying to pick each other apart when it's just something that has always existed in the past?
Well, I think because for many years, the Battle of Alberta existed more so in the memory for a lot of us, because neither team rarely were both teams good at the same time. And the rivalry hatred comes when you actually have good teams and they've got something to play for. And I believe everybody in the province should thank Matthew Tkachuk for what he did. He reignited the passion in the Battle of Alberta, and then it just built from there. And then, of course, who doesn't love a goalie fight? Just kind of gets people fired up. And you got Ethan Bear fighting, who's not really a fighter. And so fans, I think, on both sides are like, yeah, now I've really, Tkachuk's you need a villain in a rivalry. You need someone that the other fan base hates. And the Oilers got Cassian, and they got a few other guys. They've obviously got some skilled players that Flame fans don't like. So I think it's great. I wasn't the biggest fan of the conference that they did for the playoffs. I would have preferred, and it would have been the same 24 teams. I just would have said the top 5 in each division and the next 2 wildcard spots, which is exactly what they do in the regular season, except it's 3 plus 2 wildcards. Because now you would have had divisional games. Because you look at the first round, no one's playing a divisional opponent in the West and only one in the East. That's ridiculous to me. Like Calgary and Winnipeg is old school rivalry, but that's 30 years removed. Flame fans and Jets fans today don't really have any animosity to each other. If Calgary would have played Vancouver or Edmonton, Flame fans would be loving it. You'd be more intense for it, and no different for Edmonton. But Edmonton playing Chicago and Calgary, Winnipeg, that's probably the best first round matchup. But Vancouver, Minnesota has no animosity. It kind of sucks. But the Flames, I think, probably got the worst first round matchup of all the teams, because Winnipeg is a really hard forechecking team. They got a lot of skill, and they got the best goalie, I think, in the division. So that's the only negative, I think, for Flame fans. If they come out and play well, they got a good team, but the Jets are a tough matchup in how they forecheck coming out of a pandemic. I think that's a challenge for Calgary.
It is a lockout. It was a lock-in, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, lock-in. Right.
Jason, we're coming up to the end of our time. I have 2 questions left for you. The first question is, over all the years and all the interviews that you've had, who was your favorite person that you interviewed and why?
You know, it's interesting because during this pandemic, I've really had to change the focus of my show. And like I've always felt my best skill set is an interviewer. I'm very curious. I do a lot of research, and I got a good memory, so I can remember a lot of things from the past. And during this pandemic, we've gone to what a segment we call story time, and where we get athletes on to talk about not just their playing career, but you know what they did to get there, and you know certain hurdles they've overcome. And so, like prior to this last few months, Donovan Bailey would have been my favorite interview. I had him in studio for an hour, and he was just really passionate and fiery, and I just like that type of personality. But during this COVID, like we had Rich Clune on, who talked very openly about his substance abuse while he was a player. Like, and he's still playing in the American League right now. And he was extremely open about, you know, he would drink all night and then show up at the game and then have a 2-hour nap after morning skate. And he's like, you know, my body, I don't know how I did it. And then we had Mark Fraser on and George Larac talking about just, you know, systematic racism that they endured as black men in Canada growing up. And, you know, George had a really abusive father. And probably one of the strongest questions I had is when George told, and I've known George for years, but I didn't know his dad beat him up as a kid, which is really unfortunate. It's not something a lot of people talk about, but he felt now was the time. You know, he'd kind of gotten at peace with his dad. He went and just said, "Hey, Dad, like, you know, I forgive you. They're never going to have a great relationship, but at least if his dad dies, he doesn't have a lot of hatred." But I asked George, so he was 50. I asked him, like, when did you finally stand up to your dad? And he told the story with like, and you could just hear the emotion, him reliving it. He was 16 years of age, and he finally just had enough. And, you know, his dad never touched him after that. And we had so many emails and texts from people who had gone through similar situations. Those type of interviews where it, like, we forget at times that athletes are just humans. And I've always tried not to do that. But the last few months has really allowed me to go more into the human element. And it relates to people in a much better form. And I found that, you know, like a lot of fans all of a sudden, if they can relate to a player, like it can be as simple as, oh, Connor McDavid's favorite song is this. Well, that's my favorite song. You know, I feel closer to it rather than just the usual, hey, what do you think about the power play stuff, which is not overly fun for me. So I would say in the last 3 months, probably Rich Clune, Mark Fraser, George Larac, those interviews have been very impactful to me.
Just the descriptions that you were giving me gave me shivers, because it really is about the human element and how we came from whatever it was we were to whoever we are today. And I think that's kind of how I started us off. So it's nice that we came full circle, Jason. My last question to you, and it's probably the most important question I've got, is I am going to go into this playoff pool, and I want to know who the final 2 teams are.
I would load up on Tampa Bay Lightning.
All right.
They were
Tampa.
They're rolling going to the playoffs. I like that team a lot, and they got a lot of depth. So, you know, you can get their 5th and 6th score, and you're probably still going to get some good point totals from them. The West I think the West is wide open. Honestly, and really to win a pool, I would say you probably want to load up on 4 teams that you think are going to make it, because then they're all playing, you know, a fair amount of games. In the West, I still like the Blues, you know, and they're going to be rested, unlike no other Stanley Cup champ has ever had this much rest before they get to defend their title. So I like the Blues. They're a hard team to beat in the playoffs. And then, you know, Vegas or Edmonton. I'm a little probably more dogged on the Oilers, only because I'm biased to skill. I like high skill players, and so I think, you know, Draisaitl proved it the first year in the playoffs. You know, when he dominated, he had 16 points in 13 games or 12 games, whatever it was for the Oilers. And he's like, I like Draisaitl a lot. And McDavid, while he played this year, he wasn't fully recovered because he hadn't been able to work out. Like, he had to rehab all summer, and he still was second in the league. Well, now he's been able to train, and he's a freak when he trains. Like, I think Connor McDavid comes back and is going to be on another level. So I don't think Edmonton can get out of the West, but I think they might be able to get to the conference final.
Jason, I just want to thank you. I made notes of all of that, so I'm probably going to win the pool now. So no big deal.
Right, don't get mad at me when hopefully Tampa doesn't choke like they did last year.
Yeah. You might owe me a drink or two because of that.
Jason, thank you so much. I really, there's a couple of things that I want us to reflect on as we close this off, because this really is about connecting everybody
in a special way. And a lot of that for me was how you brought forward people to start thinking about the business of sports again, and that it's not just about being entertained. There should be a price tag of value associated with it. So really appreciate that conversation. Also, just want to thank you again for how you contribute to the community, because what you do actually does make a difference, and we continue to need more and more role models like you. So hopefully you can raise some more kids like that. That would be fantastic. Maybe not the mouthiness that you have, but like just that kind passion to the community.
Oh yeah, no one's perfect. Yeah, if everybody got along, it'd be boring.
Well, thanks again, Jason, and we just really enjoyed our time with you today.
Well, thank you all. Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Until next time, Taleo Connects. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.